will remember this day.
The Trinity Test and the revelation of the first atomic explosion to the world was one of the most important moments in the 20th century.
The Trinity Test and the development and the race and the fact that it was all attempting to save kind of humanity from fascism.
What was really interesting was going back and trying to understand what these guys were thinking and the terrible decisions that were placed in front of them.
I knew this was going to be one of the most important things to technically figure out.
When Chris makes a film, he wants to do as much as possible practically, and it's absolutely all about creating a world that the audience can identify with.
In the start, everybody is just scared shitless. Everybody resets sequence. Nobody knows how to approach it because with Chris, it's always the same. We have to figure out ways to do these kind of things in camera. And every time when you get sort of overwhelmed by it, you take a step back and you make it a little bit simpler, you know? And slowly, you know, a scene like this sort of grows and comes to life.
We tried to get permission to shoot at the actual Trinity Test site at White Sands Proving Grounds. Unfortunately, as a proving ground is busy with bombing runs and all these different things, we weren't able to physically fit in their schedule.
I got with the scouts and I said, okay, well, this whole stretch looks the same, essentially. It's the same mountain range. And so we moved 60 miles north. So we were in the exact placement, just literally 60 miles up here.
At Trinity, there's so much you can dig into as far as schematics and the way that the telephone poles were laid out and the wiring.
We just followed the research in terms of dressing the interior bunker. The really cool thing is you could physically go into the bunker and go up to the window and there's your tower. And, we could cheat the distance in the lens.
It was pretty unreal. Who builds a 102-foot replica of the Trinity Tower?
There's so much historical stuff out there. You want to make sure it looks right, and you just do the research. Building the gadget itself, that was fun. We're able to kind of help tell a little bit of that story of how it gets assembled, the core and the plutonium and all the, and how it all goes together. And Chris likes everything kind of for real, like the winch and everything set up for the bomb was pretty legit the way it was.
Walking on Ruth's set, that's where I really felt this is what they would have seen. This is really what this looked like. This is where they detonated an atomic bomb.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want from theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
It's an extraordinary moment in human history. And I wanted to take the audience into that room and be there for that conversation and be there when that button is pushed.
You're dealing with the biggest themes, the biggest of moral dilemmas. And what's at stake? What's at stake is insane.
One of the trickiest things was to kind of plot Oppenheimer's sort of moral journey through all of this, because he's kind of dancing between the raindrops.
This kind of moral puzzle that he was confronted with.
It's happening, isn't it? Cillian's performance is so mercurial and so subtle that you're kept guessing as to what this guy's intentions really are. Because you see him become the king of the hill in Los Alamos and quite like it.
It was a very conscious thing for Oppenheimer. He was very consciously creating his own iconography. It wasn't an accident, the hat and the pipe. That was very thought through.
I think the silhouette is one of the most important signatures that you could create for a character. The silhouette is what takes the audience through their journey of the story that's before them.
There are no real color photos of Robert Oppenheimer. There is a colorized photo on Life magazine. And from that, the most important element was the blue shirt. And so we decided that Robert Oppenheimer will always wear a blue shirt.
Our continuity was really aging. Some people had 4 or 5 different looks. I think the challenge is to, on IMAX, create all of these known people and do the journey of their life on film, but with that kind of detail. I think that's the biggest challenge. I ended up going to an optician's and got a pair of my glasses magnified, and then I do my checks with those glasses, which have ended up, in a funny way, being called the IMAX glasses.
Detonators charged!
What I knew from experience, having done, a nuclear explosion via computer graphics and Dark Knight Rises, which worked very well for that film, and I was very pleased with everybody's work on that film. It showed me that with a real-life event like Trinity that's as well documented, the footage is very accessible, that computer graphics would never give you the sense of threat that you see in the real-life footage.
You know right away you're not doing the explosion that they did, so you got to figure out a way that you're going to at least get something big, something we could repeat from different angles, and was going to kind of get it right.
You ready? Ready, Neil, 100%.
Thank you. Okay, we are.
Because, you know, people definitely take a better look at his movies, and especially the accuracy on a film like this.
1, 0.
So on this show, a lot of the effects work is, special effects and visual effects very much bundled together.
Andrew, together with Scott Fisher, their whole sort of unit was one big science project.
So this is a thing for simulating the shock wave from the atomic bomb. There's a slider to cover this bed in thin dust and then release that. And as these little wires slide under the dust, it kicks up like a little shock wave.
The two of them did a lot of R&D. They did a lot of experimentation. They came up with some very interesting analog methods.
1, 0.
A lot of different types of explosions, a lot of different frame rates, approaches to how to film it with the camera, a lot of different things going into that sequence.
On top, we have about 60 gallons of gasoline with some high explosive, and we detonate that, and then about 0.2 of a second later, we detonated some aluminum powder for some bright flash, and then about almost a half a second later, we detonate the mortar at the bottom, which is gasoline and diesel and black powder, and that pushes up through to kind of create our mushroom cloud.
Okay, we're hot. Here we go. Roll cameras. Rolling. Rolling, rolling. Speed. Speed. Okay, and go.
I think for modern day effects, this is kind of bigger than normal. Back in the day, a lot of this was commonplace on a lot of movies, but I think now well, not quite this big.
It's also all about build-up. Jennifer, she's a brilliant editor with the help of like classic film language and editing. They build up this crescendo that is really, 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 really impressive in so many different ways.
For me, it's like the lead up to that was the most interesting, and like, these guys, you've been through it with them. Learning their faces and, who looks like what and who looks scared and who looks super confident. So you're like rooting for them and you want them to be safe.
There's a point where the music takes a big shift, and that's when they're getting ready to do the final test, and the whole musical tone just completely changes. Going from things that sounds like music to things that doesn't sound like music. So I'm using all these different sound effects and making that into a very stressful emotion, using music more like sound design. You can feel it more in your body than in your ears, and it just feels very uneasy. It's an interesting kind of point where you can almost like breathe out, but with a big tension.
With the Trinity Test, I approached it moment by moment. I found firsthand descriptions really intriguing and really inspiring. It was really just all the little details, all the little bits of machinery they used, old analog equipment humming. All this equipment is more or less period accurate. The solenoid activates the detonator, but all these sounds are just meant to kind of keep us in the suspense of waiting. There are moments that demand silence. It's kind of counterintuitive because in movies you expect to hear the explosion when you see the explosion.
When it does go kaboom, you have been lulled into this sense of astonishment. That is all about playing contrast to get the reaction out of the audience.
Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen. Until somebody builds a bigger one.
What we were able to do for the Trinity Test and get into the finished film, to me, is extraordinarily beautiful, but also very frightening.